My name is Chris, and this happened when I was in college, renting a cheap basement apartment. It wasn't much, but it was close to campus and within my budget. From day one, I noticed it was a bit odd. There were strange drafts, an old musty smell, and this eerie quietness that filled the place. But hey, it was just a college apartment, right? A few nights after I moved in, I started noticing sounds. At first, it was light scratching, like a mouse scurrying behind the walls. I figured that's all it was and dismissed it. But then it got louder. Scratching turned to what sounded like shuffling, like something was moving behind the walls. It was almost like someone, or something, was trying to get out. Every time I heard it, I would stop everything, listening with my heart pounding, but it would always fade away. One night I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard it again. This time, though, it was different. I could have sworn I heard my name, faint and drawn out, but unmistakable. Chris. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I turned on every light in the apartment, hoping the brightness would scare away whatever it was. But the noise had stopped, just as it always did, leaving me to question my sanity. The next morning, I decided enough was enough. I called my landlord and told him about the noises. He seemed skeptical but agreed to come check things out. When he arrived, I explained everything, pointing out the sound seemed to be coming from behind the closet wall. He hesitated, but eventually, he opened the small crawlspace access panel in the closet. That's when we found it. Inside, there were crumpled food wrappers, empty soda cans, and an old ratty blanket. The realization hit me like a punch in the stomach. Someone had been living in my walls. But the worst part was the writing. Scrawled on the wall in black marker was a list of dates, each one lined up in eerie precision. And next to the most recent date was a note. Tonight. The landlord backed out of the closet, white as a sheet, and called the police. They searched the crawl space and my entire apartment, but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no indication of who or what had been inside. I moved out that same day, leaving the mystery and the horror behind. But even now, sometimes, I wake up in the dead of night, hearing my name whispered, wondering if the man in the crawl space ever found a new place to hide. Number 2. This happened to me when I was driving back from a friend's house late one night. It was about a 40-minute drive down a long, lonely highway, with nothing but dense woods on either side. I'd driven this road countless times, but something about that night felt off. The air was thick with fog, and the road was completely deserted. My headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond that, it was pitch black. About halfway through the drive, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road, waving frantically. It was a man, disheveled, wearing an old coat and a torn baseball cap. He looked distressed, like he'd been out there for hours. Against my better judgment, I slowed down, rolling down my window just a crack to hear him. He approached quickly, his eyes wide. "Please," he said out of breath. "My car broke down up ahead. Could you give me a lift to the nearest gas station?" His tone was pleading, but something about it sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to drive away, but he looked desperate, so I mumbled something about needing to get home and drove off, trying to shake the feeling of guilt. I glanced in my rearview mirror, expecting to see him still on the roadside, but he wasn't there. And then I saw it. His reflection. He was in the back seat, grinning at me in the mirror. My blood ran cold and my hands tightened on the steering wheel. I whipped around to look, heart pounding, but the seat was empty. Nothing. It made no sense. I glanced back at the road, my hands shaking as I sped home. When I got back, I ran inside and locked every door and window, unable to shake the vision of his face in my mirror. The next day, I searched for any reports of stranded drivers or hitchhikers in the area, and that's when I found it. A man, fitting his description, had been arrested years ago for luring drivers into remote areas and attacking them. But here's the thing, he was listed as deceased, and I swear, I still see his face sometimes, just out of the corner of my eye, grinning, as if he's still waiting for me to pull over and help him. Number 3. My friends and I rented a remote cabin for a weekend getaway, something to break away from the usual routine. The cabin was deep in the woods, isolated from any town, with nothing but trees surrounding us. On the first night, after we'd settled in, one of my friends, Tom, mentioned he'd seen someone standing outside earlier. He laughed it off, saying it was probably just a tree or shadow. But there was an odd tension in his voice, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I woke up feeling a strange urge to look out the window. My room faced the back of the cabin, overlooking a narrow path disappearing into the dark woods. As I peered through the glass, a flash of white caught my eye. A face, a mask, pale and expressionless, stared back at me from the edge of the tree line. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning I told my friends, but they brushed it off, saying I was just letting the isolation get to me. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of that blank face. That night, we gathered around the fire, joking and telling stories, trying to lighten the mood. But then, Tom suddenly went silent, staring out the window. "What is it?" I asked, my heart racing. "I think he's outside again," he whispered. We all turned to look, but the figure was gone by the time we did. Paranoia set in, and we decided to leave the next day. Back home, we developed the photos we'd taken. As we flipped through them, we noticed something that made our blood run cold. In the background of one picture, barely visible among the trees, was the figure with the mask, watching us. The same pale, expressionless mask from my window. None of us could explain how he'd appeared in our photo, or why he seemed to follow us. I still see that masked face in my dreams, staring, waiting, almost like it's only a matter of time before he shows up again, just outside my window.